Welcome to the Mystery of the Shadows, friends. Today, I will tell you carnival horror stories. I would be glad if you subscribe before the video. Have a good time. The town of Willow Creek was known for its tranquility, a place where nothing extraordinary ever happened. The biggest event of the year was the annual Autumn Carnival, a time when the townspeople would come together to celebrate the harvest with games, food, and laughter. This year, the carnival promised to be even more exciting than usual. A traveling troupe of performers had set up their tents at the edge of town, and among them were a group of clowns that had everyone buzzing with anticipation. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the carnival lights flickered to life, casting a warm glow over the grounds. The townspeople arrived in droves, eager to forget their worries and immerse themselves in the festivities. Children darted between the booths, their hands sticky with cotton candy, while parents laughed and cheered at the ring toss and dart games. The clowns roamed the grounds, their bright costumes and painted faces bringing smiles to all who saw them. Among the clowns was one who stood out. His name was Felix. His costume was similar to the others' oversized shoes, a baggy suit with colorful patches, and a red nose that squeaked when he pressed it. But something about Felix was different. His makeup was slightly smudged, as if hastily applied, and his grin was wider, more forced than the others. Yet, no one seemed to notice the unease that lingered in his presence. As the night wore on, the carnival grew more crowded, the atmosphere more electric. Felix wandered through the throngs of people, his eyes darting around nervously. He seemed out of place, as though he didn't belong among the other clowns, whose laughter was genuine and carefree. Every so often, Felix would pause, his gaze locking onto someone in the crowd, his grin stretching wider. It started innocently enough. A young boy, no more than 10, approached Felix with a grin of his own, holding out a balloon to be twisted into an animal. Felix took the balloon, his hands trembling slightly as he began to twist it into shape. But instead of a dog or a giraffe, the balloon twisted into a grotesque, unrecognizable form. The boy's smile faltered, his brow furrowing in confusion. Felix just stared at him, his grin unwavering. Then, in a flash, Felix popped the balloon with a quick jab, the sudden noise making the boy jump. The boy's mother quickly ushered him away, casting a concerned glance at Felix, but she didn't say anything. As the night deepened, the carnival's joyful atmosphere began to fray at the edges. People started to notice odd things. A man swore he saw Felix following him, only to look back and see no one there. A woman found a knife small, but sharp on the ground near where Felix had been performing. She handed it to a nearby worker, thinking it must have been dropped by mistake. No one connected these incidents to the clown with the too wide grin. It wasn't until the first scream pierced the night that the true horror began to unfold. Near the Ferris wheel, a woman staggered out from behind one of the tents, clutching her side, blood seeping between her fingers. Her eyes were wide with terror as she collapsed to the ground. Panic erupted among the crowd as more screams followed, and people began to scatter in every direction. In the chaos, Felix moved like a shadow, his once awkward gait now purposeful and swift. He struck quickly, his victims barely seeing him before they felt the cold steel of the knife he wielded. The once vibrant carnival grounds turned into a scene of terror as people ran, stumbling over one another in their desperation to escape. The carnival music, once cheerful, now played eerily in the background, a twisted soundtrack to the nightmare unfolding. Felix moved through the chaos, his grin never wavering. He was no longer just a clown. He was something far more sinister, a predator in the midst of his prey. His past was a mystery to the townspeople, but if they had known, they would have recognized the face from the news of face that had once belonged to a man named Michael, a patient at the nearby Willow Creek Asylum. Michael had escaped weeks earlier, vanishing without a trace. No one had connected the dots. No one had realized that the harmless-looking clown was anything but. As the screams echoed into the night, the remaining carnival performers tried to stop Felix, but he was too quick, too determined. It wasn't until the police arrived, sirens blaring, that Felix finally slowed his rampage. The officers pursued him through the maze of tents and booths, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. But Felix was elusive. His knowledge of the carnival's layout giving him an advantage. In the end, they found him standing in the middle of the abandoned Ferris wheel, his knife still in hand, his grin as wide as ever. The police surrounded him, their guns drawn, shouting at him to drop the weapon. Felix just stood there, his eyes wide, as if trapped in his own twisted reality. Then, with a sudden, jerky motion, he raised the knife to his throat and slashed, the grin finally fading as he crumpled to the ground. The carnival was left in ruins, a once joyous celebration turned into a scene of tragedy. The townspeople, those who survived, would never forget the night the carnival came to Willow Creek. They would never forget the clown with the too wide grin, whose laughter had masked something far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. The autumn air was crisp as Daniel and his daughter Emily made their way toward the carnival that had set up just outside of town. Emily, with her blonde curls bouncing and eyes wide with excitement, clutched her father's hand as they approached the brightly lit entrance. The smell of popcorn and fried dough filled the air, and the sounds of laughter and carnival music created a joyful atmosphere. Daniel had promised Emily a fun evening, and she had been talking about it for weeks. As they passed through the gates, Emily's eyes darted from one attraction to the next. She pointed excitedly at the Ferris wheel, the spinning teacups, and the various game booths. Daniel couldn't help but smile at his daughter's enthusiasm. He was a single father, and moments like these were precious to him. They started with the games, where Emily won a small stuffed bear after several tries at the ring toss. Her giggles filled the air as they moved onto the carousel, where she rode on a white horse, waving at her father every time she passed by. Daniel watched her with a warm, proud smile, snapping a few photos to capture the memory. As the night went on, they indulged in sugary treats and rode more rides, the carnival lights flickering against the backdrop of the darkening sky. The evening seemed perfect, a rare escape from the routine of daily life. But as they made their way toward the Ferris wheel, something felt off. Daniel couldn't quite place it, but a sense of unease began to creep into his thoughts. He noticed a group of motorcyclists lingering near the edge of the carnival grounds, their bikes lined up in a neat row. They wore black leather jackets and helmets with dark visors that obscured their faces. The sight of them sent a chill down Daniel's spine, but he pushed the feeling aside. This was a place of fun and laughter, and he didn't want to spoil Emily's night with his worries. They boarded the Ferris wheel, and as their car ascended, Emily leaned against the side, looking out over the carnival with wonder. Daniel tried to relax, but he couldn't shake the unease gnawing at him. From the top, they could see the entire fairground, the lights twinkling below like a sea of stars. But something caught Daniel's eye. A group of the motorcyclists was now moving through the crowd, slowly and deliberately. As their car descended, the unease in Daniel's chest grew. He noticed more motorcyclists gathering, their movements synchronized, purposeful. The carnival goers seemed unaware, still caught up in the festivities, but Daniel's instinct told him something was wrong, very wrong. They stepped off the Ferris wheel, and Daniel hesitated, his eyes scanning the crowd. The motorcyclists were converging, forming a circle around the carnival's central area. A deep, primal fear began to take hold of him. He squeezed Emily's hand tighter, his eyes darting around, searching for an escape route. But before he could act, the motorcyclists sprang into action. Without warning, they drew weapons, chains, bats, and knives and began their attack. The joyful shouts and laughter turned into screams of terror as the masked riders descended on the crowd. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest as he grabbed Emily and pulled her close. The carnival erupted into chaos, people running in every direction, desperate to escape the sudden violence. Daniel moved quickly, trying to find a way out, but the motorcyclists were everywhere, their black helmets reflecting the garish carnival lights. He could hear the sickening thud of weapons striking flesh, the shrieks of the wounded, and the roars of the attackers. His only thought was to protect Emily, to get her to safety. But as they rounded a corner, one of the riders blocked their path. The faceless helmet turned toward them, the dark visor like an empty void. Daniel felt a surge of adrenaline and fear as he tried to shield Emily. The rider raised a chain, swinging it with brutal force. Daniel barely had time to react, pushing Emily out of the way. The chain struck him across the back, sending him to the ground with a cry of pain. Emily screamed, a sound that tore through the air, but the rider didn't stop. The chain came down again and again. Daniel, dazed and weakened, tried to crawl toward his daughter, who was huddled against a booth, her eyes wide with terror, but the rider's focus shifted to her. No, Daniel's voice was hoarse, desperate, as he reached out for her. But the rider was too quick. The chain wrapped around Emily's small body, and with a vicious yank, she was pulled toward the attacker. Emily's scream was cut short as the rider swung the chain again, the impact sending her small body crumpling to the ground. Daniel's vision blurred with tears and pain as he watched his daughter fall. The world around him seemed to slow, the sounds of the carnival fading into a distant roar. The rider stood over Emily's lifeless body for a moment, then turned and walked away, leaving Daniel alone in his anguish. The other motorcyclists continued their rampage, but Daniel couldn't move, his eyes fixed on his daughter's still form. The carnival that had promised a night of fun and laughter was now a scene of horror. The motorcyclists, faceless and merciless, rode through the chaos, leaving destruction in their wake. As the night wore on, the carnival grounds became eerily quiet, the once vibrant lights flickering and fading into darkness. When the police finally arrived, the motorcyclists were gone, leaving behind only the shattered remains of what had been a night of innocent joy. Daniel, broken and barely conscious, was found clutching Emily's lifeless body, his mind unable to process the horror of what had happened. The carnival was over, but the nightmare it left behind would haunt Willow Creek forever.